Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadi Tamastu Mabid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And we will share the screen here. Share. Very good. Everything looks correct. And the first topic, how to improve the world. 3 attitudes to help us cope with our planet's conflict-ridden condition and 1 strategic long-term way to change it. Okay, sounds good. 2008, so of course, when we talk about conflicts, they're always related to when it was written. Recently, a group of devotees lamented to me, as people often do these days, about the dreadful condition of the world, asking my opinion about the best perspective those on the spiritual path can hold. It is certainly much on everyone's mind with all the unusual problems we face. My answer was that there are multiple viewpoints we need to hold in terms of the world. And what perspectives come to your mind about how we should look at the world and the challenges within it? One perspective is that yes, it is good to try to improve conditions in the world while keeping expectations reasonable. A second point of view we can remember is that trying to change the world is a little like trying to straighten a dog's tail. Keeps going back the way it was, no matter what we do. That's a quote from Yogaswami. So, how do we balance those two? The key is to find the right balance between working to improve the world and accepting it as it is, knowing that you can't totally transform it overnight and that change does not come easily. Third, more philosophical view is to hold. A third, more philosophical view to hold is that everything is as it should be. Humanity's plights and predicaments all have a divine purpose. Striving to improve the world, we don't want to feel that things are not supposed to be the way they are. We may wish it different, but in fact, it is a natural playing out of what has been set in motion in the past. It is a natural playing out of what has been set in motion in the past. So the Israel-Palestine Arab conflict has been set in motion a long time ago, and it's working itself out. So the current condition is a result of everything that's happened in the past, which is done by man. Sometimes when individuals talk to me about this, they try and blame it on God. How can God let all this happen? Or why is God making this happen? So I make it clear, well, God is not the doer, man is the doer. Man set certain actions in motion in the past, and he's facing the consequences in the present, and what he does in the present will create the future. So God is not involved in that at all. It's all created by man. We can, to a limited degree, direct and guide the flow of events, encourage things to play out in a better way, but the forces of past action still continue to powerfully influence and define the present. Those with spiritual insight know that the world is in a perfect state of evolution at every point in time. In the months after 9/11, visitors meeting with me in our Guru Temple here on Kauai would often ask, "What do you think about these terrible events?" Their sense was that conditions had never been worse. So it was a bit upsetting in the U.S. because it's only the second time in U.S. history it's been attacked from outside. One was Pearl Harbor, of course, and exactly 60 years later, those who are astrologers can think about that, got to 9/11. So because it's seldom, was really shocking to U.S. residents. And their sense was the conditions had never been worse. A lot of fear. Reflecting back on recent history, I responded, well, times have been worse. All you have to do is go back to World War II. We were not just fighting terrorists who hijacked someone else's airplane. We were fighting Japan and Germany, two very powerful military bodies with thousands of planes who were causing havoc in the world. Over 60 million people were killed in that war, mostly civilians. That was a far more serious problem by comparison. Can't argue that. Europe gives us another example. For as long as history tells their story, European countries were fighting one another. But what are they doing now? They are working together as the European Union. They've joined together. Do we foresee Germany attacking England ever again? No. A change in consciousness took place in Europe. That's a good sign, and it's just one example of how the world is changing for the better. The fundamental challenge is the tendency to divide the world into we-they, rather than maintaining the inclusive we perspective. In the we-they perspective, they are different than we are, and we tend to emphasize all of their unseemly or negative qualities. If we strive to keep everything as a we and maintain the principle of inclusiveness, then we minimize that tendency. So I remember a long time ago, some major event in Singapore, and they had banners up which were talking about we Singaporeans. They were creating inclusiveness among the various ethnic groups in Singapore. We are all Singaporeans. All groups have the tendency to polarize and split. Even a large family will split into we-they. Interesting. Just gets big enough and then it'll split. It is a natural tendency of humankind to divide into two groups that have problems with one another. So the question is, how can we strengthen we consciousness and avoid splitting into we-they? We consciousness is strengthened by focusing on what is held in common interests. We-they consciousness is strengthened by focusing on differences. An ultimate we consciousness is what some astronauts have experienced in looking at the Earth from outer space, seeing mankind's commonality rather than dissimilarity. How do we solve or at least minimize this problem? Through persistently teaching the opposite. Gurudeva took a simple step by creating large granite signs for the island of Kauai that say, "One island, many peoples, all Kauaians." These were installed by the county at prominent locations to emphasize the unity of all the many peoples of Kauai. He created similar signs for Mauritius to strengthen unity there. Because in every community there is a tendency to split. In the Kauai community, the tendency is to split according to ethnic background. Gurudeva was inspiring acceptance of one another and counteracting the force of prejudice. He knew that prejudice toward those who are of a different race, nation, or religion can start simply as distrust and then deepen into dislike and deepen further into hatred, which can turn into a compulsion to inflict injury. Are children born with attitudes of prejudice and hatred? Absolutely not. They learn such things at home, from their family and friends, and at school from teachers and classmates. Prejudice toward other ethnic groups, religions, or nations is even taught in religious institutions. Not good. The long-term solution, one that will take many decades, is to instill prejudice-free consciousness in future generations. People who are older are set in their ways and unlikely to change, but each new generation starts out with a blank slate. Children can be taught tolerance, acceptance, and openness toward those who are different. With each new generation, we have an opportunity to teach positive, unifying beliefs. And one of the biggest changes that can take place in society occurs as members of a new generation mature into positions of influence and power. When they become the political, economic, and social leaders. If they are imbued with unbiased spiritual attitudes, conditions in the nations they serve will improve. Well, basically, that's the long-term pattern of change, is that it naturally changes each time a new generation comes into power. And that change can be controlled to a certain extent. This is where opportunity lies in encouraging parents to raise their children in such a way that they are free of prejudice, and then do it again with the next generation, and then do it again and again. Do that for enough generations and we will change the world in a major way. But it takes time. We can all help in our own spheres of influence, family, friends, work, community, doing our part to instill a prejudice-free consciousness in youth and thus transform attitudes that divide peoples, neighbors, and nations. In other words, unless we are a major leader in the world, such as political, business, etc., our sphere of influence is pretty small. But that still counts. In the sphere of people that we influence, we can work to help them be more prejudice-free. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed the goal eloquently. I have a dream that one day my children will be perceived for the content of their character rather than by the color of their skin. That is the point, to see the person, not their ethnicity or their religion, and impose negative generalizations on them. That's a statue in Washington, D.C. there. Even positive generalizations and preconceived notions should be avoided, as they too obscure this genuine interaction. For example, some say that Chinese are industrious. But in truth, not all Chinese are hardworking, and even thinking in such positive stereotypes prevents you from seeing an individual as he or she is. So we don't want to see them as a stereotype. See the individual as he or she is. There are two cardinal principles that naturally motivate Hindus to be free of prejudice and not fall into the we-they consciousness. And that's the question to you. What are the two cardinal principles? Hindu ideals. The first is that every person is a divine soul. Even a terrorist or a criminal is a divine being, the one perhaps needing many lives of further evolution. There are no people who are evil intrinsically. Their behavior may be evil, destructive, but everybody is divine on the inside. Therefore, everybody is important. Even the terrorist is important. Even the criminal is important. They deserve to be encouraged to come up in consciousness. It is the duty of spiritual people to strive to lift everyone up in consciousness, whether they are for us or against us. We want them to come up. We don't want to write them off. Second Hindu principle that inspires prejudice-free consciousness is that the whole world is a one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is a powerful statement because everyone understands family. When we say the whole world is family, we mean that we hold the same positive, loving attitude toward everybody that we do toward our own kinfolk. We want them to be happy, do well, and prosper. Saying and believing that the whole world is our family confers an attitude that excludes no one. Underlying these two Hindu concepts is the knowledge of reincarnation and karma. Change and evolution occur over many lifetimes. The purpose of human birth is to grow and learn in the great school of earthly experience. Karma, law of cause and effect, is the great and always just teacher. All souls are on this wondrous journey, whether they know it or not. Gurudeva used to say, you have to be careful whom you hate, because you might end up being born in that group in your next life. Be careful. Thus you will see what it's like to be on the other end of your hatred. So that's true about any negative action toward another person. You can end up receiving it. Because obviously you don't know what it feels like to receive it, and you need to have that experience. So that's karma. Summary. I find it clarifying to hold three complementary attitudes toward the world. First, we do want to try and improve it. In other words, we don't want to take the third position that philosophically is perfect and therefore we shouldn't do anything. No. We still want to try and improve it. But we want to remain realistic about how much and how quickly it will change. And we strive to accept everything that is as being the way it should be, even though it's not the way we would prefer it to be. It's the way it is because of what has happened in the past. A Buddhist monk put it well. The world is perfect, with plenty of room for improvement. That's great. To gradually make the world a more peaceful place, we can spread the idea of raising children with a prejudice-free consciousness. Less prejudice means less hate. Less hate means less violence. Well, we can't change the world overnight. We can change it over many generations. A very prominent Shastri in Jaffna once told Gurudeva, to make a major change takes 3 generations. 3 generations to make a major change in behavior. 75 to 90 years, something like that. And we're in our second section. About the Shiva, what are the main Hindu denominations? That was easy. How would you answer that question? So important to remember they're the main ones, they're not the only ones. Lots of minor ones. Hinduism's primary denominations are Saivism, Shaktism, Vaishnavism, and Smartism, as we know. For 2 centuries, Western scholars have struggled to understand India's faith. They found it so vast and varied in its beliefs, practices, and ways of worship that they could not comprehend or describe it. What they didn't realize is that India's Sanatana Dharma, or eternal faith, is a family of religions with 4 principal denominations. Family of religions with 4 principal denominations. For example, seeing so many deities, scholars wrote incorrectly that Hindus have no supreme God. Incorrect. In fact, Hindus all worship a one supreme being, though by different names. For Vaishnavites, Lord Vishnu is the supreme being. For Saivites, God Shiva is the supreme being. Shaktas, Goddess Shakti is supreme. And Smartas have a more complicated point of view. The choice of deity is left to the devotee. These strains arose in different geographical and linguistic regions. Each has its own beliefs, scriptures, religious leaders, and monastic traditions. Each has its own temples, festivals, and ways of worship. Some are more focused on devotion and temple worship. Others stress yoga, mantra, and scriptural study. Each has hundreds of millions of followers. All 4 accept the authority of the Vedas and the basic beliefs of karma, dharma, and reincarnation. Much of their culture and tradition is the same. Most Hindus follow the same lineage as their parents and grandparents. As Saivites, we respect all Hindu paths, and we may occasionally visit the temples of other Hindu groups. We join in their festivals and honor their religious leaders, but we hold firmly to our Saiva path. Third topic, quotes from Yoga Swami's words of our master. Don't think of the past. What does that mean to you? Lots of people think a great deal about the past. Most of their time, their thoughts about the past are not productive ones, just a waste of mental energy. A good rule of thumb is not to think about the past unless it is producing something useful related to the present. So that's a good test. After you think about the past, you can say, how did that benefit the present? And if it didn't, then you don't need to think about that again. He is the clever man who sees God both inside and outside. What does that mean to you? That is monistic theism, a dual approach. Worship God as separate from you on the outside, theism, and as one with you on the inside, monism. Some traditions are just monism and others just theism. Ours is both. So he's describing Saiva Siddhanta. Outside and inside both. Both your Pilayar and I are the same age. This you don't know. Pilayar is a name of Ganesha. So this person is clearly a devotee of Lord Ganesha. So how can Lord Ganesha and Yoga Swami be the same age? What does that mean to you? Strikes me is the deepest level of consciousness is eternal. Meaning doesn't change. At that level, everyone is the same age. Eternity is eternity, right? So if part of you has existed for eternity and part of Ganesha has existed for eternity, you're both the same age. That part of you. Thank you very much. Oh.